So if I were to show you this sequence of 4 repeating numbers, how long would it take for you to lose interest? Maybe 10 seconds, 5 seconds? I'm sure some of you are probably bored just looking at the screen right now. So let's switch it up. Instead of numbers, what if this was a sequence of different shapes? Maybe a square, a circle, a triangle, or something just repeating. Or, no, you know what, scratch that. Instead, what if it was 4 different notes? And that sequence of 4 notes was repeated for, let's say, 398 times. Would any of you actually listen to a song like that? See, this reminds me of the first time that I heard the song Fancy by Iggy Azalea, the Australian singer and rapper. Fancy climbed the Billboard Top 100 charts in 2014 and reached the #1 position. That song remained there for 7 consecutive weeks. In other words, this song was unanimously the most popular song in the world for that period of time. So here's a quick excerpt of what that song actually sounds like. So I'm sure a lot of you noticed this, but the music behind the voice as it kicks in, it's just 4 notes being repeated. And if you want to get precise, that sequence is repeated 398 times over the course of 3 minutes and 24 seconds. So as someone who is classically trained at the piano, who loved listening to music his entire life, and who had a passion in music production, upon hearing this song over and over and over again, courtesy of iHeartRadio, I began to ask myself, well, where has the complexity in modern pop music gone? I understand a lot of you may not even care about this question because when it comes to entertainment, not everything that we do has to be a reflection of our intellect. I mean, we are a generation that enjoys watching TV shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or we like to read trashy TMZ articles about our favorite celebrities. And, well, we listen to songs like Fancy or Trap Queen or Hotline Bling, whatever the kids are listening to. You get the idea. But whether or not we want to admit it, pop music is a reflection of our culture in many ways. I would even go as far as to say one of the ways historians will remember our generation is by looking at the music our generation listened to the most. So for those of you in the audience that are in your 20s or perhaps even younger, imagine explaining to your grandkids that the song that captivated the youth in 2014 was made up of only 4 notes that were repeated, or featured lyrical gems such as, yes, who dat, they do that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to criticize the song Fancy. If anything, I enjoyed listening to it the first time I heard it. But this song started a line of inquiry in my head which I could no longer ignore. I began to ask myself, where has the complexity in modern pop music gone? But to even begin to answer this question, it becomes more a matter of what makes music complex overall. You see, this entire discussion hinges on our notions of complexity, what it is and what it entails. What I want to do today is I want to unpack this very human construct, that is to say complexity, and I want to invite each and every one of you to explore with me to see how, by reevaluating what makes our very own passions complex, we can change what we can do with our passions. I will communicate these ideas using my passion, which is music, pop music, music production, but it doesn't necessarily have to stay within the confines of that subject. So let's get started. What is complexity? How do we define it? Simply put, we can understand it as the amount of information an object has. Okay, that doesn't really tell us much, but it's a very broad umbrella definition. So in a musical context, if we say something has musical complexity, we can understand it in terms of melody, rhythm, harmony, and structure. So we can say the Beethoven piece was incredibly complex in terms of its melody, or it had a lot of rhythmic variation, so on and so forth. You get the idea. So what does the research tell us about the trends that pop music seems to be following? Well, researchers looked at a pool of 500,000 pop songs made since the 1960s, and using statistical analysis along with computer algorithms, they were able to find 3 resounding trends. Number 1, the average loudness of music is actually increasing. So songs created a year or 2 ago would be louder than songs that were made in 1961, for example. Secondly, they found that the timbral variety is decreasing, so songs start sounding similar when it comes to the timbre of the music, the tonal quality that the sound possesses. And finally, they found that the pitch complexity is also decreasing, so songs are going to be less adventurous in terms of the chord progressions and melodies that they use. Okay, so that speaks about the trend for the last 50 years or so, but I wanted to know, what can we actually learn by looking at music written over 200 years ago? What can we learn by juxtaposing modern contemporary pop music with music written by legendary composers like Beethoven, for instance? So look at this example on the screen. This is an excerpt from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the second movement. All the different blocks on the screen represent the different notes that the orchestra, the different instruments of the orchestra are playing at a certain given time. So take a listen. All right, and just for comparison's sake, let's juxtapose that with the song that captivated the youth in 2014, Fancy. So you don't have to be an expert to see the vast disparity when it comes to our perceived musical complexity between these two pieces. And again, some of you still might be wondering, well, what's the big deal? It's just pop music. Of course Beethoven's going to be more complex than stuff we listen to, like while we're driving in the car or something. But think about it like this. As human beings, everything our generation will accomplish, whether that's in the realm of science, medicine, or technology, for instance, that's only made possible because we're building on the past discoveries that generations of the past have already established. In other words, everything that we will make progress towards in our generation, we're just building upon what our ancestors have done. So this doesn't necessarily seem to be the case when it comes to the type of music we listen to. Could you imagine how absurd it would sound if I told you 200 years ago in central Germany that, take the medical sciences for instance, were far more superior than they are now? That wouldn't make any sense. That would sound absurd. So why does this actually seem to be the case when it comes to the type of music we listen to? It's clear that there's a missing piece. There's something that we haven't even begun to consider yet that can enable us to allow the state of music, the state of musical complexity and how it exists in pop music, for example. You see, I began grappling with this question, and we have made progress compared to 200 years ago, even though it may not be apparent at surface level. The way that we can actually create music now puts different tools at our fingertips that the composers of the past could only dream of. So let's look at our definition of complexity again, right? We just said the amount of information an object has, or for our purposes, a song has. But what necessarily is information? What does that mean? It's whatever we're gauging or measuring, whether that is qualitatively or quantitatively. And as we've already mentioned before, this was melody, rhythm, harmony, and structure. But what happens when we actually begin to accommodate new pieces of information and get those to work with our notion of musical complexity? You see, the missing link is sound design. The way that we can actually craft the sound is just as much a piece of musical complexity as is melody or harmony or rhythm, for instance. We now have the technology to be able to have complete control over the waveform of the audio that the speakers are playing back to us. We can put any piece of information anywhere along the audio frequency spectrum at any frequency band from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Now, if that doesn't mean anything to you, if it sounds like a bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo, don't worry. We can understand it in these two examples. So it doesn't matter if you've been studying music for 20 years and you graduated from Juilliard, or your musical expertise goes no further than singing along to Fancy while driving in the car or something. We can all agree that music really does make us feel things. It invokes emotional responses. So how would a composer in 1836, like Edvard Grieg, for example, how would he go about eliciting a specific type of emotional response? So listen to this excerpt from In the Hall of the Mountain King, and pay attention to two things. Number one, what the music makes you feel, and number two, how is the music actually functioning to elicit that emotional response within us? So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that piece. And for me personally, it's very spooky. It's as if there's something lurking in the shadows that I know is there, but I have this dread. I don't want to find out what it is. That's what that music reminds me of. But if we ask ourselves, how is Edward Grieg actually making us feel that way? Well, simply put, he has complete control over the melody, rhythm, harmony, and structure based on the different notes and melodies that he's writing for the different pieces of the orchestra. But he doesn't have the same level of control over the nature of the sound itself. So if we were to strip away those 4 traditional subcategories, could we still have a piece of music that was just as compelling or would still elicit a response that was just as powerful? You be the judge. Listen to this piece by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross from an excerpt from the soundtrack of The Social Network, and pay attention to what it makes you feel, but also become present to how bare the music is in terms of its melody, rhythm, harmony, and structure. Right, so I'm sure some of you noticed that although the music does bring upon a feeling of tension, there's sort of a conflict looming. At least that's what I think of. It did it without really using any melodic complexity. What was the melody of that? If you had to sing that for someone, you would just be sustaining a single note. It would be a rather uncomfortable encounter. Where was the rhythmic complexity aside from just a bass note being repeated every 4 bars? That song was essentially just one note. And yet, the genius of it is they had complete control, they meaning the creators of the music, they had complete control over the nature of the sound, and they could still make us feel a certain way. So this is the power of sound design. And to further elaborate how it has a role in the creative process of creating music, allow me to do a very quick and simple demonstration. So this is a program, it's a digital audio workstation called Logic Pro. If any of you have GarageBand, just think about it as GarageBand on steroids. And I have some pieces already here. So here's just a very quick pattern that I took the liberty to draw out beforehand. All right, so nothing special. It's just pretty much repeated notes. And what's interesting about this is actually a synthesizer. So a tool of sound design is being able to synthesize sounds from scratch. This is a representation of a sine wave. So think about a sine wave on a graph. This is the audio representation of that. That's what it would sound like. And then I have some recorded audio as well that is being loaded into a drum machine, a virtual drum machine. It just sounds like this. It's just a typical clapping sound. And finally, I Googled annoyingsound.mp3 and I got this. Yeah, it's beautiful. And just using these 3 elements, I want to show you how we can actually create something really fun to listen to in about a minute. So we can just start extending the sine wave out. We can have some claps. One of the things that I want to do with these claps is I actually want to add reverb. It creates the illusion that the sound is existing in a certain type of space. So we can do that here. Okay, that's fine. And then I moved our annoyingsound.mp3 into something called a sampler. It allows us to take that recorded audio and we can pitch it up and down, stretch it out, or speed it up. We can basically play it like it's an instrument on a keyboard. So, okay. And I'm just going to start drawing out a pattern here just to get something interesting to listen to. So you can tell what I'm doing isn't even tremendously complex, at least in terms of its melody. Oops. Knowing your keyboard shortcuts helps sometimes. All right, cool. And yeah, we can add some reverb to that sound as well. The final step is to look at our sine wave again and realize that if we just pitch that down maybe by 3 octaves or 36 semitones, add a little bit of distortion, we can get a pretty cool bass line. And yeah, this is our completed product. Thank you. So I'm sure a lot of you realize this was just a recreation of the pop song Dark Horse by the pop singer Katy Perry, which also charted in 2014 as well. So this is what the actual song sounds like. Right, so in about 2 minutes, you could see how we could streamline the creative process using the technology that enables us to design sound. Right, and this is just an example. It's a very crude example. So I understand a lot of you may not be sound designers or musicians, or you may not even care about this stuff directly. But it doesn't matter, because each and every one of us has a unique passion that is true to who we are. So by reevaluating what makes our passion complex, the same way that I started to reevaluate musical complexity, by accommodating new pieces of information in our working definition, the same way that I started looking at sound design as a component of musical complexity, we can increase our appreciation, shift our understanding, and therefore alter what's possible with our passions. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to change what you can do with your passion, start by asking yourself and reevaluating what makes your passion complex. Thank you.